Hi. I just got home from work. This is a Monday afternoon, and it's gonna get dark real fast. I actually ordered a little bit of DoorDash, some Panda Express for dinner, and that will arrive soon. Lolo's toys are out. Ignore all those stacks of books back there. I'm rearranging books and needed them out of the way for a while before I put them back on shelves in a totally another place. So just ignore that back there. I've got all the lights on and I'm gonna try and do this so that it goes up either tonight or tomorrow morning. I'm really excited about this. I'm gonna do a series this year, one video a month, taking us through the things they carried. Now, this is a book very near and dear to my heart. This is a book that I have read so many times. I'm gonna start though with a disclaimer. This is my interpretation of this book. I have read this book 6 times a year for 5 years in a row with groups of 11th graders. And then ever since I have read it once a year. I don't really talk about it much, sometimes, but not much, because it's so important. It has so much meaning that I can't just say one thing about it usually. I want to say all the things about it. And so you can come along with me on this ride. Really, this is me trying to express in a way that will last my interpretation of this book. I have often said that I would like to write a book about this book. Maybe I will, and maybe this is the start of my thinking through that. I'm not sure. I just know that I really want to do this. My interpretation of it may not be your interpretation of it. You are very welcome to read along with me. In fact, I strongly encourage you to do so and have a discussion with me down in the comments below. I'm gonna be reading 1 to 3 stories a month. There are 22 stories in this book. Together, they all make one story, and I will also be arguing that they are all the same story. I'm going to start this month in January with just the first story. So there is my disclaimer. You also need a content warning for this book. There's a lot. This book takes place in the theater of war, and that theater of war looks like a lot of different locations. Sometimes it's Vietnam, sometimes it's your childhood home, sometimes it's your relationship with your father, sometimes it's your relationship with your daughter, sometimes it's your relationship with the truth, sometimes it's in a field, sometimes it's in a boat. That theater of war shows up in a lot of different places in this book. I would argue that it's brutal no matter what the theater looks like. And so I do want to give you a content warning. I don't want to tell you what you're going to encounter. Part of the importance and the lessons, part of the lesson in this book is to not look away from the hard thing, to find beauty in the hard thing. I don't want to take away that opportunity for you, but don't go into this thinking that it is my usual comfy fare. This is not a faint of heart kind of book. I'm also going to make an assumption that if you are here and you are watching this video, you are aware of the content of at least the story that I am speaking about at that time. And I will be using spoilers, and I will be doing very little summary, just the bare minimum of summary. This is a series of videos this year for people who are either reading along with me right now or who have read this book. I often tell people that they need to read the book 3 times before they've read the book. And that's not always the case, not with every book, but with this book, it really is. Once to get the lay of the land, once to get your place in it, and once to understand a little bit of what's going on. So my assumption is that you have read this, or you are currently reading it, and that nothing in this will surprise you. I strongly encourage you to read it, because like I said, I won't be doing a lot of summary. Won't be doing a ton of context, especially the deeper we get into the book. I'll just be jumping around and making connections, and it will really help if you are familiar with the book. I understand this is probably a very niche series. I don't expect there to be a ton of views of this. And if you're bowing out now, hey, thanks for coming. Maybe I have some other kind of topic or information that you might be interested in. Maybe you're more of a TBR kind of person. I don't know. I also have a great book club, so you can hop over and check out those videos. But this is a little bit different, and it's not like anything I've ever done. And it's not like a lot of things I've seen on BookTube before. So maybe you want to read along. It's going to take us a year to read this, and we're barely going to scrape the surface. So my assumption is you're reading or have read the book. Hi, Lola. This is Lola, if you haven't met Lola. Oh, I'm Jenna. I didn't introduce myself. Hi, I'm Jenna, and this is Books Love Jenna. And I'm an English teacher by day and a booktuber by weekend and night. And I love books. I love them. I love them. I love them. I love them. And I also love Lola. And she looks like she's looking for trouble, but that's pretty normal for this time of day. I'm not usually filming right now, so she's probably a little upended and she may get into some trouble, but that's okay. We'll plow on. The structure of this book. So like I said, there are 22 stories in here, and there are generally 22 soldiers in a platoon. And that is not to say that each of these stories is dedicated to one soldier. We don't talk about 22 soldiers, but I do think that there's something in that. I don't think that there's anything in this book that is not intentional. And I don't say that about every book. I know there's always those jokes about those English teachers that are like, look at the yellow curtains. By the way, I do have yellow curtains, but look at the yellow curtains. The yellow symbolizes sunshine and sorrow. You can tell by the way the word "the" is used in this sentence. That's not me. I mean, I like to do that, but that's not what I'm doing here. There's really stuff in this book, and I really don't think that any of it is unintentional. This is craft. This book is craft. So the structure of the book is important and vital. We start with our story today, the one we're going to talk about in the month of January, the one we're going to talk about today, which is the titular story. The Things They Carried is the name of the book, and The Things They Carried is the name of the first story, which is about 25 pages long. In the first book, in the first story, we are really going to focus on the weight of what we are about to encounter, the responsibility of what we are about to encounter in the rest of the book. The genre. So, well, let's go back to structure for a moment. Well, no, let's stick with genre. So the genre of this book is hard to pin down. It is a set of 22 short stories, ranging in length from 2 pages to 25 to 30 pages. You can read each individual story as an individual story. However, the stories together are one complete story, one intact story. And as I've already said, I would argue that they are all the same story. What do I mean by that? Well, we'll understand when we get to it in December. When we get to the end. We'll start to understand about halfway through, but we'll really understand when we get to the end. I also want to point out this idea of truth, of reality, and how you define that. There's a whole story or chapter in this book called How to Tell a True War Story, and we will do a dedicated video to that. It's further on in the book. It's coming in a few months. There's a quote from that really helps with thinking about the genre. So I want to say that The Things They Carried is a work of fiction by Tim O'Brien, who was a soldier in Vietnam. It makes a point of saying that it's a work of fiction, but at the same time, we're dedicating our book to the fictional characters in the book. This book is lovingly dedicated to the men of Alpha Company, and in particular to Jimmy Cross, Norman Boker, Rat Kiley, Mitchell Sanders, Henry Dobbins, and Kiowa. These are all characters in the book. We're already, from the dedication, from the title page to the dedication page, we're already playing with reality. And then there's this kind of iconic quote, and he's not the first person to put this idea out there, but his is the phrasing that a lot of people use, whether they know it or not. There's this from How to Tell a True War Story on page 80 of this version of the book, which is, I think, the most common version of the book. Absolute occurrence is irrelevant. A thing may happen and be a total lie. A thing may happen and be a total lie. And another thing may not happen and be truer than the truth. We've got to keep this idea in mind throughout the reading of this entire book, that a thing may happen and be a total lie, and another thing may not happen and be truer than the truth. We've got to remember that this author, who is writing about an author who's writing about Vietnam, a war in which our author fought, is dedicating these fictional stories to fictional characters in reality. The lines are blurred. All the lines in this book are blurred. You might as well not draw a line. The lines are blurred. Also, I keep saying that this takes place in the theater of war. And that is because in the same story, How to Tell a True War Story, one of the points that is made is that a true war story is never actually a war story. It's never actually about war. A true war story is never actually about war. A war story can be about war, but a true war story is never actually about war. It wasn't a war story. It was a love story. We've got to keep that in the forefront of our mind as we read this book as well. Always keep in the forefront of your mind throughout the entire reading of this book that this is a love story, not a war story. It is set in all sorts of theaters of war, but it is not a war story. And it is a fictional story that is truer than the truth. These things happened and they are a total lie. These things never happened and they are truer than the truth. You're turning on me. With that being said, let's dive in to the things they carried. Here's where we're gonna start. We've got the who. The who in this particular story will always do this. We'll always do the who, what, when, where, and why, okay? So the who in this particular story is the Alpha Company. The Alpha Company, we're gonna travel with them throughout this entire book. The what. The what in this story is the death of Ted Lavender. That's the happening. That's the happening. Is the how it happened. The death of Ted Lavender. The when is somewhere between 1968 and 1970. That's not, we're going to jump around in time pretty often in this book, from story to story. This particular story takes place somewhere between 1968 and 1970. Where does it happen? It's going to happen in Vietnam. It's going to happen in Vietnam, but it's also going to happen quite a lot in memory. Memory is like a place in this book. The why. Why is this story being told? I almost called this themes, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna call it the why. And this story is being told to explore ideas of guilt, memory, death and loss, storytelling itself, truth, love, distance, separation, and the act of killing. The act of killing. I said I wasn't going to do a summary, but here's a brief summary. You've got this guy, Jimmy Cross, and he's young. He's in his 20s, in his early 20s. And he carries various reminders of his love for a woman named Martha. In fact, let me just read this. I'm just going to make this full screen and read this to you. It says, Lieutenant Jimmy Cross carries various reminders of his love for Martha, a girl from his college in New Jersey who has given no indication of returning his love. Cross carries her letters in his backpack and her good luck pebble in his mouth. After a long day's march, he unwraps her letters and imagines the prospect of her returning his love someday. So that's all kind of in the memory, but now he's leading a mission, he's leading Alpha Company to destroy some tunnel complexes in Vietnam. He imagines the tunnels collapse on him and Martha. And while he is distracted by daydreaming about Martha, a member of his platoon, Ted Lavender, is shot dead by a sniper on his way back from using the bathroom. Ted Lavender is shot, falling especially hard under the burden of his loaded backpack. Weight is going to be really important in this story. The morning after Lavender's death, Cross crouches in his foxhole and burns Martha's letters and photographs. He plans the day's march, and he concludes that he will never again have fantasies. So there's that, what's real and what's not real. He plans to call the men together and assume the blame for Lavender's death, and he reminds himself that despite the men's inevitable grumbling, his job is not to be loved, but to lead. Through all of this, the narrator shares a running tally of all of the things that the men must carry, often including the weight, physical, and emotional. So let's do a walkthrough of this story. Cross received a simple pebble from Martha that she had found on the shoreline, where things came together, but also separated. Much like Cross and Martha come together, but also separate. His hand comes together on her knee, but she doesn't like that, and so it separates. He comes to her, but she doesn't come to him, and they separate. And yet she continues to write him letters. On occasion, he would yell at his men to spread out the column, to keep their eyes open, but then he would slip away into daydreams. So he's with them, but he's separate. Just they're pretending, walking barefoot along the Jersey shore with Martha carrying nothing. Carrying nothing. So by the time we've read page 8, we've read about a lot of the things they carry. We've read about a lot of the things they carry. It says that they were called grunts, and to carry something was referred to as humping it, as when Lieutenant Jimmy Cross humped his love for Martha up the hills and through the swamps. So he's carrying that, but he's also carrying photographs. Goes on to list all the things. This is what they carried was partly a function of rank and partly field specialty, and then it gives you the item and the weight of the item that each different person carries in the platoon. We've read a lot about what has been carried by the time we get to this carrying nothing line on page 8. He would feel himself rising, sun and waves and gentle winds, all love and lightness. Remember that. Remember that. Remember that. All love and lightness. Rising. Rising. We're going to see that imagery again. He felt shame. He hated himself. He had loved Martha more than his men, and as a consequence, Lavender was now dead, and this was something he would carry like a stone in his stomach for the rest of the war. So, first, he's carrying a stone that Martha, incidentally, when she says in her letter that she carried it in her pocket next to her chest, and now he carries it in his mouth as something to suck on while he marches. And because it has come to represent Martha and him thinking about Martha and him being distracted and then somebody dying on his watch and him taking the responsibility for that, the pebble that was carried by Martha, that was carried by him, is now carried in his stomach as a weight. It weighed nothing, and now it weighs everything. It was Martha, now it is Ted Lavender. And he will carry it forever. They carried the land itself, Vietnam. They carried Vietnam. They carried their own lives. And for all the ambiguities of Vietnam, all the mysteries and the unknowns, there was at least the single abiding certainty that they would never be at a loss for things to carry. They did not submit to the obvious alternative. That was simply to close the eyes and fall, a mere matter of falling, yet no one ever fell. It was not courage exactly, it was not valor, rather they were too frightened to be cowards. Now, I've tied this page 21 quote to something that we'll read later when we get to page 57. You can remember it or not, we will go back. We will go back and forth, but what you got there, Lola? What you got there? Did you get some laundry for me? Did you get me some laundry? Do I need to do the laundry? That's a thing she carries. Okay. I've closed the blinds. I've gotten the laundry. Let's just move forward. All right. Dense, crushing love. Kneeling, watching the whole, he tried to concentrate on Lee Strunk and the war, all the dangers, but his love was too much for him. He felt paralyzed. He wanted to sleep inside her lungs and breathe her blood and be smothered. Remember, he imagines the tunnels falling on them and smothering them. Also, please note that we're going to tie this quote in to something on page 106 and to something on page 216. He felt paralyzed. He wanted to sleep inside her lungs, breathe her blood, and be smothered. They carried the land itself. You need to remember all of these things. It feels like I'm picking things out of nowhere right now, but really all these things are going to play big, important parts as we move forward in these stories. They also help to establish, without reading the lists, they help to establish the weight of things. So because he lost himself in his dreams, because he elevated out of his reality, because he crossed over an invisible boundary, a man is dead, and he's going to carry that weight along with all the other weight that he's carrying. And the thing that gave him a lightness of being, a relief from the intensity of the weight, he can no longer allow himself to partake in his fantasies. He can no longer allow himself his fantasies. On occasion, we've seen this one, but we're going to tie it to a couple of other things right now. On occasion, he would yell at his men to spread out the column to keep their eyes open, but then he would slip away into daydreams, just pretending, walking barefoot along the New Jersey shore with Martha carrying nothing. He would feel himself rising, sun and wave and gentle winds, all love and lightness, where everything weighed exactly nothing. At night, not quite daydreaming, they gave themselves over to the lightness. They were carried, they were purely born, and he was dead weight. So on page 6, one of the things they say about Ted Lavender was, so what happens with Ted Lavender is that he is coming back. He's walking back from having gone off into the jungle to use the bathroom. And Kiowa says he was zapped while zipping. So as he's re-zipping his pants, he's shot dead by a sniper. And he falls really hard. He's carrying so much weight that he falls really hard. And it says that it gives you the weight of what they generally carried. It says the typical load was 25 pounds, but Ted Lavender, who was scared, carried 34 rounds when he was shot and killed outside Tonka. And he went down under an exceptional burden, more than 20 pounds of ammunition, plus the flak jacket and the helmet and the rations and the water and the toilet paper and the tranquilizers and all the rest, plus the unweighed fear. He was dead weight. They already established earlier that they carry only what is necessary because they have to carry it all themselves. They carry what's necessary, and now he's dead weight, and they shouldn't continue to carry him, but they do. He's dead weight, and he's weighing him down, especially Jimmy Cross. Jimmy Cross used memories of Martha to feel light, and then later on they talk about drug use, actually. It doesn't seem like it's drug use. Well, I mean, it does. It doesn't directly say that it's drugs, but they talk about using tranquilizers. Ted Lavender used tranquilizers because he was so afraid. And so on page 21 and 22, it says that at night on guard, staring into the dark, they were carried away by jumbo jets. They felt the rush of takeoff. Gone, they yelled, and then velocity, wings, engines, a smiling stewardess. But it was more than a plane. It was a real bird, a big, sleek silver bird with feathers and talons and high screeching. They were flying. The weights fell off. There was nothing to bear. They laughed and held on tight, feeling the cold slap of wind and altitude soaring, thinking, it's over, I'm gone. It goes on and on and on. This lift, when everything weighed exactly nothing. Gone, they screamed, I'm sorry, but I'm gone. And so at night, not quite dreaming, they gave themselves over to lightness. They were carried. They were purely born. When Jimmy Cross gives himself over to the daydreams of Martha, it leads to a death. And these guys on duty at night, They are also giving themselves over to a lightness brought about by the relief that drugs can bring them. And yet, Ted Lavender, he's dead weight. Light, bam. Like cement. No, man, go on. Like cement. There's a conversation on pages 16 to 18. I haven't put it on here, but it's really important. It's about storytelling. It's about the power of storytelling. It's about working it out and the repetitiveness of the story. It's a conversation between two of the platoon members, Kiowa and a man named Norman Boker. And he says, Kiowa whispers, like cement, Kiowa whispered in the dark. I swear to God, boom down, not a word. I've heard this, said Norman Boker. In a way, I mean, Kiowa has to keep telling the story. He has to keep saying it. He has to keep telling the story. He's trying to figure it out. He's trying to make sense of it. And he's verbally processing it. He's telling the story, kind of to make it real. It's so fast. It happens so fast. And he's kind of doing it because he needs to make it real. And also he needs to make it light. He needs to make it a joke. He needs to tell it to make it lighter. And Norman Boker is like, I've heard this. So he keeps telling the story. Kiowa agrees to be quiet. And then Norman finally says, what the hell? You want to talk? Tell it to me. Forget it, says Kiowa. No, man, go on. One thing I hate. And Kiowa is a Native American. So he says, one thing I hate, it's a silent Indian. This idea that your war stories need to be told, that you need an audience, that you just got to get it out. And you might be telling the same story over and over again. Remember, I'm going to argue that every story in this book is the exact same story. You might be telling I have to sneeze. You might be telling the same story over and over again. It doesn't matter. It's new every time you tell it. Every time you tell it, it's fresh and it's new. And people don't want to listen, especially if they're living it. But eventually, maybe you find the one that will let you keep telling it. And they can carry a little bit of it with you. Okay, moral. Henry Dobbins asked what the moral was. Henry Dobbins is another member of the platoon, which you're reading the story, you know. Henry Dobbins asked what the moral was. Moral, you know, moral. Sanders wrapped the thumb. So they've found a thumb. They found a body. They took the thumb, right? Sanders wrapped the thumb in toilet paper and handed it across to Norman Boker. There was no blood. Smiling, he kicked the boy's head, watched the flies scatter. Remember the boy. We're going to come back to the boy over and over again. He kicked the boy's head, watched flies scatter, and said, it's like with that old show, Paladin. Have gun, will travel. Henry Dobbins thought about it. Yeah, well, he finally said, I don't see no moral. There it is, man. The idea that the moral is there is no moral. A true war story, you're going to find out when we read that one, is never moral. A true war story is never moral. They used hard vocabulary to contain the terrible softness. Greased, they'd say. Offed, lit up, zapped while zipping. It wasn't cruelty, just stage presence. They were actors. When someone died, it wasn't quite dying, because in a curious way it seemed scripted, and because they had their lines mostly memorized, they talked grunt lingo. There's a moral here. The moral's pretty obvious. Stay away from drugs. There it is, they'd say. Over and over. There it is, my friend. There it is. As if the repetition itself were an act of poise. You can't change what can't be changed. There it is. There it absolutely and positively is. I've edited this of the language for YouTube, but know that when I teach it in my classroom, I actually say the whole thing, because that's part of this. That's part of it. They use soft language, but when it's written about, it's hard language. So there it is. The moral of the story is there is no moral of the story. The answer to your why is there is no answer. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? There it is. You are, therefore it is. So does that match up with Jimmy Cross's response to the death of Ted Lavender? His response is that the moral of the story is that he failed. He failed his men. He's going to carry this guilt. He's going to try to make it moral. He is immoral. His memory of trying to and being rejected, trying to sleep with Martha and being rejected, he's immoral. The fact that he can't stop thinking about touching her knee, he's immoral in his mind. In his mind. I'm not saying he is. I'm not making that judgment call. I'm saying what he's feeling. And he just was dreaming about that immoral action, which led to a man being killed. That's immoral. Him letting down his guard, letting down his men, that's immoral. Therefore, it's not a true war story. Norman Boker's not living a true war story. A thing may happen and be a total lie. It's not his fault that he's going to make it his fault. It's not his fault. There's no moral. There it is. There is no moral. There's no reason why it happened. It didn't happen because Jimmy Cross was dreaming about a girl who doesn't love him. That's not why it happened. Even though that's the story he's going to tell himself. Something may never happen and be truer than the truth. A thing may happen and be a total lie. His obligation was not to be loved, but to lead, and he could dispense with love. It was not now a factor. Carry on. Except that it is his love of these men that makes him do this thing. It's his love that makes him be willing to not be loved in order to keep them safer. Except he can't keep them safer. He's not telling himself a true war story. He's living one, but he's not telling himself one. Kiowa is by far telling a truer war story than than Jimmy Cross. It was very sad, he thought. The things men carried inside, the things men did or felt they had to do. We're going to see a lot of men and women do a lot of things that they have to do. Have to do. If you want to keep thinking about this, some things that I didn't talk about at all in this story, and this is just the setup for all the stories to come. We're going to go deeper. We're going to go a lot deeper. We'll even come back and go deeper into this story the further we read. You're twisting again. The further we read. But some things that you can think about that I didn't get into at all, which we will look at in other stories, is rain, water, baptism. Every time you see water in this story, every time you see rain, every time you see a river, every time you see a lake, every time anything wet is falling, you need to be thinking about baptism. Baptism in the sense of you go in as one thing, you come out as another. Okay? One boundary is crossed. You never can be the same again. Okay? So, rain, water, baptism. You can think about that in this book. How the idea of weight is developed throughout the story. I talked a little bit about that, but there's so much more in this story. What effect does reading all of these lists of what is carried have on you, the reader? How do you feel? Do you grow bored? Do you grow bored with the sheer length of the lists of the things that they're carrying? Do you get lost in the detail? Imagine living it. Imagine carrying it. What do you carry? And how do you, because we all carry a ton of stuff, and how do you become weightless? What are ways that you become weightless? Great things to think about as you read this book. Next month, in February, I'll post a video about the stories Love and Spin. They're the next two stories. They're much different. They're a lot different from the things they carried. We will be going back into the things they carried and popping out of it. Once something is read in this book, there's more to uncover the deeper you get. It's kind of like crawling into the tunnels and having everything collapse on you. By the time you get to the end, you're carrying the weight of a whole lot of stuff. So If you made it all the way to the end of this video and you find this interesting, you want to pick up the book, you want to have a conversation with me, let's talk about this book, that'd be awesome. And thanks for being here, and until next month, let's go read.